It always feels good to reunite with a long-lost soul. And in this case, a long-lost console. As a 2000s kid, I feel like the prime candidate to talk about how awesome the GameCube was back then. And I gotta say, it's true. As one of the foundational pillars for my love of games today, I adored everything to do with that system. One slight issue though, I never owned one growing up. That's right, one of the earliest consoles I got my hands on wasn't even mine. Instead, I lived those beloved memories vicariously through my cousin's GameCube. He was literally the cousin who brought all the cool gadgets and games, so that made it all the more devastating when, inevitably, I would never see that console ever again. Until one day, it came back to me in a way I could have never expected, and I want to share how that happened. Since my earliest gaming memories happened when I was a tiny child, I can't pinpoint which was the exact first game or console I ever played. What I do remember was that my cousin had the goods. He would bring either the Super Nintendo and, more importantly, a silver GameCube. Even though this console was already a few years old at that point, I thought it was incredibly cool and futuristic. All the fun colors and sounds were very stimulating for me. I wish I remembered all the games that he had, but the ones I did remember were legendary. First up was Mario Party 4, which, come on, iconic. What began as visual eye candy would become my favorite game of all time. Need I say more? My cousin also had Double Dash and its bonus disc. You know, back when bonus discs were bonuses and nothing more. Funnily enough, I remember the extra disc more than the actual fully featured game itself. I think I was like, oh boy, more stuff to play. Not me realizing these were just small demos and trailers. Out of all the content in there, Mario Party 5 and Sonic Heroes were definitely the most memorable to me. That one ice cream minigame had me hooked. I could literally play that one for hours if I could. And Sonic Heroes remains the first and last Sonic experience I've ever had. I could not figure out how to beat the beginning level. Sorry. Of course my cousin had to have Melee. It's like a rite of passage at this point. I really underestimated the massive exposure that this game would bring. As a child, I didn't know anything about a Zelda or Kirby and their history, and honestly, nor did I care to learn yet. But over time, I slowly began to familiarize myself and fall in love with Nintendo past the Mario games, and I have Melee to thank for the many first impressions. I don't even want to know how bad I was at Melee at the time. A child like me could never. I was just too enamored by the sheer amount of content this title had. So much that I couldn't fully comprehend it at the time. Yes, I had the most basic GameCube experience anyone could ask for, but you know what? Those were incredible primers for me. I may not have understood what was going on, but hey, it was a great introduction to the Nintendo brand during the 2000s. But eventually, that golden era of my cousin's fancy system had to come to an end. He stopped bringing over his GameCube as much. You know, everyone was getting older, times were changing, nothing wrong with that, which turned into never seeing that GameCube ever again. I'm not exactly sure what happens to it, cause the last time I asked, he definitely didn't have it anymore. Not the console, not the games, nothing. I'll always be grateful for the time I did have with those things, but man, it was like missing a friend that moved away. Not long after, my family managed to snag a Wii around 2008, which was thankfully able to play GameCube games. Problem was, I still had 0 of them to my name, but luckily back then, GameStop still sold those systems games for dirt cheap by today's standards, so I basically made it my mission to reclaim my cousin's games on my own terms. The benefit of growing up with popular games was that securing them later was entirely possible for me. I feel bad for the little Timmies that wanted to re-experience Path of Radiance. Oof. I vividly remember getting Melee at my local mall's GameStop for like $20. It wasn't old enough to become nostalgic just yet, and I somehow convinced my mom to get this oddly pristine copy of Double Dash from this website that definitely doesn't exist anymore. I think it's authentic, but who knows. In true dramatic fashion, I was dying to get my hands on the last game I remembered playing, Mario Party 4, which I was already nostalgic for at the ripe old age of 14. So inevitably, I braved the elements of eBay.com and managed to secure myself a copy, cause by then, GameStop no longer carried GameCube games altogether, but it was still early enough to find them for cheap online. I know, quite resourceful of me. That was the game that spoke to me the most as a kid, and no amount of YouTube videos could fill that void. Just having Mario Party 4 alone was enough to satiate my GameCube needs for many years. I wasn't completely shut out, I just knew that I was only 90% there. And then COVID kinda skyrocketed GameCube nostalgia into a frenzy. No biggie, suddenly everyone's coming out of the woodwork loving this little lunchbox. Did they actually like XD Gale of Darkness? Didn't matter, they all wanted it now. So, prices have been crazy, right? Everything, including the console itself, became hot commodities. While I was so glad that I snagged the games I cared most about, there was still one thing I knew I was missing. The original console itself. As frivolous as it sounds, there really is nothing that can replace the authenticity. It was always in the back of my mind, how I could finally complete my GameCube experience if I just had the console itself. But I knew it wasn't going to be a priority for a while. That was, until one fateful day in April 2023. I was catching up with a close friend who I've known since high school. He's literally one of 2 friends I know in real life that loves Nintendo just as much as I do. I randomly brought up the entire story of my cousin's long-lost GameCube within our conversation, and how I was wishing for it back. In my mind, I imagined that it'd be like a within the next few years type goal, but as luck would have it, he happens to have an extra GameCube. And remember how I said that my cousin specifically had the silver one? Yeah. My friend had that exact same color. What's even crazier is that he was willing to give it to me for free. Like, huh? That was extremely generous of him. We've talked about Nintendo stuff for a while, but I absolutely did not see that coming. I swear that was fate right there. Like my cousin's GameCube came back to me in spirit. What are the odds? And now that I have it, I'm happy to report that my entire life has stayed exactly the same. Don't get me wrong, I'm truly grateful that my friends donated an entire console to me. That kind of stuff doesn't happen too often nowadays, but not gonna lie, it's one of those things where I wanted the idea more than the actual console itself. I've been enjoying all my GameCube games on my Wii this whole time. It's just more practical and convenient for me. But I know one thing for sure. By the twist of fate, a part of my childhood has officially been restored, just like how I remember it. Was there a big takeaway to all of this? Not really. Sometimes, telling a nice story without an arduous journey is still worth sharing. Though, I guess one lesson I learned is that memories can have such a big influence on our perception. I always wonder how my gaming experience would have changed if my cousin decided to give me his GameCube all those years ago. I probably wouldn't have treated the system as this untouchable holy grail, like I had been throughout my life. Honestly, I never expected to own a GameCube like this again. Even though it's literally just a regular model, it represents a distant, unresolved memory. It wasn't even my own GameCube, but so much of what I love about Nintendo dates back to what I experienced on this one device, and I'm grateful to my cousin for introducing this brand to me as a child. I don't think he realized how obsessed I've become now, and I'm even more grateful to my close friends for being kind enough to restore that feeling I'd been missing. Occasionally, I do like to bust out my new lunchbox to play those childhood games, despite already playing them for hundreds of hours on my Wii, but it truly hits different when I push down that disc tray and hear that iconic startup jingle. Now that we're moving into an all-digital future, hopefully the GameCube's library will officially be preserved in some fashion. But for now, it's nice to finally appreciate the console that started it all for me. I couldn't have asked for a better reunion.